Now, e-ink. E-ink. So e-ink is yet another completely different technology. So if you've used e-ink outside of being a researcher or doing specialized stuff, it's almost certainly on a Kindle or e-reader. So e-inks have a very different property. Everything we've talked about so far essentially is shining light out. It's emissive. E-inks are a reflective technology. So the way that they work is we have a bunch of pigments inside the display, which are positively and negatively charged. And so if we put a negative charge, it sucks all the positive pigments up. And if we arrange it so that those are the white ones and the negatively charged pigments are the black ones, then we can put a positive, and we can control whether on these little bubbles, the white little pigments float up or the black little pigments float up, right? So here we have a charge where we make everything on top white. Here we've flipped it around, and the other pigments are still in there. They're just not being pulled up to the charge. So our eye is up here on the top. There's no light passing through this thing. So our eye is looking at this display, and we're seeing the reflected light from the environment. The light comes in the environment and comes back to our eye. I think this one is supposed to be a GIF. Oh, maybe not. Maybe I turned it off. Okay, so we have these positively charged things. We have some kind of electrode layer, which controls what we see. Oh, now is my GIF going? Yeah, my GIF's going, right? Okay, and these little pigments can float to the top or bottom and change what color is inside this little bubble. So when we flip this thing, I think we should see it flip again. So much for this GIF. Oh, it's happening just very slowly. Okay, so so we can control what's, by applying an electric charge, we control sort of what's on top. And of course, when the light comes in, if it hits white stuff, it bounces off white. And if it hits black stuff, then it's not there, just like ink on paper. So we have some kind of grid or positive and negative things, right? So you can think of these things as the pixels, but there's also this microstructure, which is in here, which we're going to turn on and off electrical voltages to get. So you don't often see color e-ink, or at least I'm not aware of it. Amazon doesn't have a color Kindle yet, do they? I don't think so. Or at least I don't have one yet. I have a black and white one. But anyway, you could put multiple colors of pigments in here. And just like we use CMY on color printing on paper, you would use CMY color pigments in order to do this. And so these certainly research prototypes of this exist. So here's a zoom in. We were looking at zoom ins on other things. So here's a zoom in onto a Kindle. And so we can see here's our black and white, and you can see this little bubble structure because there's this chemical structure that's down inside there. And you can see you don't get perfectly crisp black and white boundary lines, and there's errors that can be in here. So, okay, let's zoom out a little bit. So here's our Kindle with black and white, and here's our iPad. And so you can clearly see the LCD doesn't cover everything, right? So the LCD has space for the electronics in between. So we have these black lines in between, and we get more solid coverage in the e-ink. Now, if we zoom in, so now we're down at sort of 0.5 millimeter kind of scale, trying to show stuff, right? So 0.5 millimeter. This is an older picture, right? So it's probably higher resolution on more modern iPads. 0.5 pixel was sort of 0.5 millimeter was sort of 2 pixels worth of information, or maybe it's, I don't know if you count pixels, this is a pixel or this is a pixel. So I don't know if it's 2 or 4 pixels, but anyway, you got really black. Notice the contrast is not quite as good on the Kindle, right? We can't get to the full blacks that we get to. So there's some changes in what we can actually get. For reference, here's a newspaper, right? So, okay, here's the Kindle. We didn't have sort of full contrast and everything's not perfect on the edges. Here's a piece of newspaper print. And the printing on newspaper is not that newspapers are perfect either. So here what you're seeing is the fibers in the paper. So remember, paper is made out of trees, right? We chop and we make various sizes of the fiber, and the ink runs along the fibers. So it's not like it's perfect in the newspaper either. Okay, so what's the ramification? The main difference for these displays is the fact they're reflective. The light bounces off of the front. And even if you have a Kindle which has a light in it, typically that light is stuck in front of the display, right? Just like the light bulb on your ceiling. It's a light in front that bounces off of these things and comes out the other side. So they have a fundamentally different look. Many people find them easier to read on, which is why we see reading devices as the thing that's primarily using it. Also, their update rate is not great. I've seen them running at 60 hertz, but those are research prototypes. If you want it to be cheap enough to sell to people, they don't really update very fast. So we can't use them for